Inflation in the United Kingdom has surged to a new 40-year high and is now in double digit. Britain is now facing rising food prices, a worsening cost of living crisis and the prospect of a recession.
A warning from the IMF, central bank intervention, disorderly currency movements.
Now, the British pound has fallen to its lowest level ever against the US dollar.
The UK now facing what looks increasingly like a financial crisis.
Sabotage is thought to be behind 3 leaks in the Nord Stream natural gas pipelines connecting Russia to Europe.
The United Kingdom has announced an 80% hike in electricity and gas bills, worsening the current cost of living crisis.
Hi everybody, the United Kingdom is witnessing one of the worst economic crises in its history, and the Russian gas cuts have triggered such a catastrophe for the UK economy that now inflation has touched a 40-year high at 9.9%, energy bills are shot up by almost 100% in spite of capping, and most importantly, the pound has become one of the worst performing currencies, with its value dropping by 24% against the dollar. On top of that, the newly elected Prime Minister has come up with something called the mini budget that has further triggered such a disaster that it's now snowballing from an energy crisis into a debt crisis, into a housing crisis, into a currency crisis, and maybe even a banking crisis. The question is, what is so terribly wrong about the UK that its economy has turned into such a disaster? How is this mini budget triggering an economic catastrophe? And most importantly, as students of business, what are the study materials to help you understand this economic crisis of the United Kingdom? This video is brought to you by Coding Invaders, but more on this at the end of the video. This is a story that dates back to 23rd of September 2022, and by this time, 3 major events had happened. Number 1, the Russians had completely cut off gas, because of which the cost of electricity had shot up by almost 100%. Secondly, on top of the existing gas shortage, winter was incoming for Europe, so energy consumptions were about to hit new peaks from September till December. And thirdly, even if Europe had 90% of its storage full as of September, it would take only 90 days for it to reach dangerously low levels. So in short, shortage of gas during a peak consumption time with no storage option has shot up energy prices to extreme levels. Now, even though they are receiving help from the US and other countries, the gas prices are still very high, and hence the cost of production and inflation have hit a record level of 9.9%. This is where on 23rd of September 2022, the Prime Minister of UK announced something called the mini budget to tackle the energy and economic crisis in the UK. And the pointers mentioned in this budget have been so terrifying that it shook the economy of UK itself.
Today we are publishing our growth plan that sets out a new approach for this new era built around 3 central priorities.
The government is resisting calls for a U-turn on the mini-budget, despite a run on the pound and the markets being plunged into turmoil.
British Prime Minister Liz Truss has admitted that her government's recent announcement of a mini-budget has caused a bit of a disruption in the British economy.
The question is, what is so wrong about these policies and how has it escalated this crisis? Well, it started with the energy policies of UK. To tell you about it, just like the retailers buy milk at a cheaper rate and sell it to the customers at a higher rate, even power companies buy energy in the form of gas and oil, convert that into electricity and sell this electricity at a higher cost to the consumers. So if it costs them £100 to produce 1 megawatt hour of power, then they would sell it to the people at £150 per megawatt hour and make a profit of £50. But as soon as Russia started cutting off gas, since the electricity cost soared, the government introduced a cap at £280 per megawatt hour. So even if it costs the power companies £400 to produce 1 megawatt hour of power, they can charge a maximum of only £280 per megawatt hour. So you see, the cap itself has come at a very costly rate because the average cost of power before invasion was £189 per megawatt hour. But now they have increased this cap from £280 to £520 per megawatt hour, or £0.52 per kilowatt hour, which is a 175% increase from last year. And in exchange for this, the government has said that although this unit price is high, for the next 2 years, even if the energy prices shoot up, the citizens will still pay £520 per megawatt hour only. So tomorrow, even if the cost of electricity to the power companies shoots up to £1,000 per megawatt hour, the citizens will still pay £520 per megawatt hour only. On top of that, the Prime Minister of UK said she will keep a £400 energy discount this winter, which I guess will be paid by the government. And whatever the losses these power companies will incur in these 2 years will have to be offset from loans given by the banks. And this price cap is applicable for everyone, no matter how rich or poor you are. So this is fantastic, right? The cost of energy has been increased so people consume less electricity, and for the next 2 years, the citizens don't have to bother about energy bills even if the costs go up. Then the question is, why is this a disaster? Well, the answer to this lies in this graph presented by the National Institute of Economic and Social Research. Now, if you look at this graph, this has the class of people going from poor to rich and states the money that they spent on energy. So here, you will see that the poorest segments of UK spent close to £2,750 and the richest spent £5,000 on energy. But if you look at how much this is in terms of their percentage income, while for the poor, even £2,750 is almost 8% of their income, for the rich, even though they spent £5,000, it was just 3% of their income. So the NICER says, since the energy bill is such a small proportion of the rich people's income, if you charge the same unit price to both rich and poor, then it is bad economics. To give you an oversimplified context, even though King Charles spends £75,000 per month to power the palace, he will pay the same unit price per unit as you who's living in a 2 BHK apartment. And this is in spite of they consuming way more power than you. So for you, £5,000 may be 20% of your income, but for the king, even £75,000 may be less than 1% of his income. So now that the rich and poor are being charged the same cost without any consideration for their consumption, it brings 3 major disasters to the table. Number 1, even if the poor uses energy for necessary activities like heating the house and the rich uses it for a luxury activity like heating a jacuzzi, they will be charged the same. And this will weigh very heavy on the poor considering the cost of power is already at a 100% surge. Secondly, there is no penalizing the rich for using more power than needed. So obviously, the rich and ultra rich will tend to consume more energy than needed. And lastly, because there is no extra cost for this usage, there is no extra revenue. So even if the energy prices go up to £1,000 per megawatt hour, the rich will still pay £520 only, even if they can afford to pay £1,000. And hence, the power companies will have to bear the losses, which will then need loans or compensation from the government or the banks. This is the reason why the National Institute of Economic and Social Research proposed a variable slab system, which is, by the way, used in India. Now, just to make this variable slab system more relatable to you, let's take the example in the Indian context. It basically says, for the first 1,000 units, since it's a necessity, everyone would be priced at 4 rupees per unit because that's what a normal household needs. Until this point, the government will subsidize the cost. But as soon as the slab of necessity is crossed for the next 1,000 units, the cost would drastically climb up to 20 rupees per unit. And for the next 1,000 units, the cost would be an exorbitant 50 or even 300 rupees depending on the market rates, because only the ultra rich consume beyond 2,000 units in a month. So neither power companies nor government bears the losses for the rich and ultra rich. But in the UK, since they are not using this model, analysts say that it's going to cost the government very heavily, because now the losses of the ultra rich and rich will be borne either by the government or by the power companies. And according to the policy documents, it is set to cost the government as much as £130 billion over the next 18 months, in addition to the $3 trillion debt that they already have. So the question is, how will they get this huge chunk of money? Well, they'll have to raise it through bonds. Now the question is, what is the problem with bonds? UK is after all a developed country, so if the government issues bonds and promises to pay back the people after 20 years, then what exactly is the problem? Well, guess what? UK is even heading towards a bond crisis, which will cause a currency crisis, which will cause a mortgage crisis, which can then cause a banking crisis, and therefore turn UK into a complete economic mess. So the question is, what on earth is happening with the UK and what's wrong with its bond market? Well, let's start from the basics as usual. What is a bond? It's nothing but a loan to the government given by the people of the country. In this case, if the UK government wants to offset the energy losses worth £100 billion, instead of going to the World Bank, it will simply borrow this £100 billion from the people of UK. Now obviously, one person cannot give the government £100 billion. So the government will divide this £100 billion bond into 1 million units, with each unit being worth £100,000. So when 1 million people buy 1 unit of this bond, they've essentially loaned the government £100,000 each and £100 billion collectively. And in return, the government would guarantee that after 10 years or 20 years, it will return this money with a 3% interest. Now, what have we learned from the previous episode? The longer you keep this money with the government, the more interest they'll pay you. For example, a 2-year bond could pay you a 3% interest and a 10-year bond could pay you a 7% interest. So just like in the previous episode, the demand supply forces will come in. But this time, the primary focus is not the yield curve, but the cost of borrowing of the government. So let's try to understand this using a simple example. So let's say there is a 10-year bond that is being sold at £100 per unit at an interest rate of 3%. So if you invest £100 in a 10-year bond, you would get £3 as interest. Now listen to this very carefully. Now, if there is nobody willing to buy these 10-year units from the government at £100, what will the government do? They would decrease the price of the unit to £90. So if Shubham bought this unit at £90, he would still get £3 in return, which means back then the government was borrowing £100 at 3% interest. But now they are borrowing just £90 at 3.33% interest. And in spite of this cost drop, if still people don't want to buy these units or there is an oversupply of these bonds in the market, the unit price will drop further to £60, which means now the government is borrowing £60 at a 5% interest. So you see, because of the demand supply mismatch, the government is getting less money from the people at a very high interest rate. And this is a very dangerous position for any government where the interest of the bonds are climbing so high. This is the reason why the 10-year bond rates in the UK have gone up by almost 300%, going from just about 1% to 4.11% in just 9 months. Now most people would say, yeah bro, so what? The government bonds are now giving out 4% interest, which is absolutely crazy. So everyone will flock to buy these bonds and the interest rates will go down, right? So what exactly is the problem? Well, guess what? Here's where the UK has another problem in the form of currency depreciation, which makes the bond market of UK almost useless for big traders. And this is where we have the currency carry trade that we spoke about in the previous episode. But in the previous episode, we spoke about the impact of the Feds hiking the interest rate on the currency carry trade. But this time, let's have a look at what will currency depreciation do to the currency carry trade. So let's say William is a billionaire who wants to make money using currency carry trade in the UK. So what would he do? Firstly, he would check the lending rates in the US and check the bond market rates in the UK. So if the US bank is lending at 2% and the UK bonds are yielding 4%, William will decide to enter the market. So firstly, he would borrow $1 million from the US bank. Secondly, he would convert this $1 million into pounds. Now, had he made this conversion in January, this would amount to £714,000, considering 1.4 to be exchange rate. Then he would invest these £714,000 in the UK bonds and leave it there for a year. Then after 1 year, had it been a normal market, he would get his £714,000 with a 4% interest, which amounts to £742,560. Now, he would convert this amount to dollars, which would amount to $1.04 million. So, if you look at the interest rate of the Feds, he just has to pay 2% interest to the American bank, as in $1.02 million. So, out of the $1.04 million that he has, he just has to pay $1.02 million, and the rest $0.02 million will be his profit. So you see, by simply rotating this money, William was able to make $0.02 million in profit. But like I said, this is the ideal condition. But today, if you look at the market in UK, the value of pound has depreciated by almost 21.4% since January. So now the exchange rate is just 1.1. Now let's see what happens after 1 year. When William gets £742,560, when he converts that to dollars at an exchange rate of 1.1, he would get only $816,000. But since the American bank is levying a 2% interest, he still has to pay $1.02 million to the American bank. Which means what? Even though the bonds are giving out a 4% interest, because the currency has depreciated by 21.4%, this currency carry trade has become a disaster for William. This is what is exactly happening in the UK, whereby even though the bonds are yielding a 4% interest, the currency has depreciated to such an extent that now it has become a disaster for the investors. As a result, they are quitting the UK market. And this is further decreasing the demand for pounds. As a result, the currency is depreciating further. So now that the pound is depreciating, what will happen? The energy prices will not just spike because of the gas shortage. They will not just spike because of peak consumption levels during winter, but also because of currency depreciation. And this will take the cost of energy in the UK to dangerous levels. And when these energy bills spike up, what will happen? the government of UK will have to borrow more money in order to compensate for these losses, which means more bonds will float in the market, which means the demand for the bonds will go down, and then the interest of these bonds will go up, which means the cost of borrowing for the government will increase further, eventually depreciating the currency further, and that will lead to a vicious cycle. On top of that, they have also announced tax cuts which are expected to decrease the government revenues by $45 billion till 2026. So in short, the government of UK is cutting down its own revenues during a cash crunch situation. This is the reason why everybody is scared that this scenario will spiral the entire economy of UK into a freaking disaster. This is the reason why the Bank of England is now about to buy £65 billion worth of bonds so that they could prevent the interest rates from falling. Add this up with housing loan spikes due to inflation and bank defaults, it will cause a banking and housing crisis along with energy and currency crisis. This is the story of the economic crisis of the UK. So now UK has two options. One is to withdraw the sanctions, get the gas from Russia and chill, or secondly, deal with the complications of its economy by being dependent on the US and hope that they don't mess up. And this brings me to the most important part of the episode, and that are the study materials to help you understand this economic crisis in the UK better. But before we move on, I want to quickly thank our partners of this episode, and that is Coding Invaders. People, the international markets have been free falling in the last few weeks, and in conditions like these, there's a high possibility of a job crisis. But that's where Coding Invaders come in. They help you switch from non-IT profession to IT for high-paying jobs within 6 to 8 months as a data analyst. Their current placement stats stand at 93%. And the best part is that before you enroll for the course, they provide you with a guaranteed job agreement with a money-back guarantee. So basically, if you do not get placed, you will get a 100% refund. Their courses have real-world business case studies, job-oriented projects and assignments designed by industry experts from Amazon, Philips, Deloitte and others. And even a civil engineer like me, without an IT background, will be able to learn data science and be eligible for a high-paying IT jobs such as a data analyst. So you don't need a coding background to get into such jobs. They have helped 20,000 plus candidates secure 10 to 25 LPA packages in the past 6.5 months itself with the help of their 300 plus hiring partners. So this Diwali, you can choose to invest in yourself rather than the markets. So if this sounds useful to you, click the link in the description and use the code TS30 to get 30% fee discount in the job guarantee batch. Moving on to the study materials, the first thing I'm attaching is this 40-page report itself, which will teach you about the mini budget. Read through it and you will understand the other nuances of this crisis. Secondly, I'm attaching the nicer paper that will teach you about the economic consequence of the energy policy. And I'm also attaching a Twitter thread from Anshul, who's the co-founder of Windwealth, and he has explained the UK bond crisis even more in depth with simple examples. And lastly, I'm attaching a thinkschool video on the Russian gas strategy to choke Europe. Have a look at that and you'll understand where did all this episode start and what is the leverage that Russia has over Europe. That's all from my side for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to support our work so that YouTube algorithm knows that this video has given value to you. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye. And don't forget to check out Coding Invaders from the link in the description.